All right, welcome everybody. It is July 17th at 6:30, Webster Select Board joint meeting with the Hopkinton Select Board. We'll open as we usually do with Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And for the full introduction, we'll have our roll call here. Dave Hemingway, Chair of the Webster Select Board.
Marlo Herrick. Normandy's late.
And then for our guests, the Hopkinton Select Board. Go ahead.
Thomas Lapoma.
Ken Traum, Vice Chair.
Stephen Whitley.
Sabrina Dunlap, I'm Chair.
All right.
Welcome.
And welcome very much. With that, one very brief announcement for the locals. The chicken dinner is just about sold out for the fire benefits. So if you want one, there's maybe a couple tickets left, so get on that. That is this weekend. With that being said, do we have any other announcements?
I do not.
Okay. So the purpose of this meeting is, as requested, for a joint meeting by the Hopkinton Select Board. I'm hoping that you're here to talk to us about the transfer station and perhaps the PFAS and the grants and stuff that are hopefully now available as information is starting to flow from the feds and the states so we can do our appropriate budgeting. But take it away, because we don't have much other than that you wanted to come talk to us.
Yeah, we're kind of blank. But send it.
We realized, I don't think I've ever actually been to a live meeting with you all. I think we might have had one during COVID that was over Zoom. So first of all, I thought it would be great to touch base, and we have some new members who have also not been at meetings. But we really just wanted to start a conversation, I think, about the transfer station. Obviously, the agreement we have is from 1975. So touch on that and just talk about whether there's changes we should think about, if there's changes that you have on your mind. Really just start a dialogue. So I know that's kind of vague, but we thought that was a good place to start. So
Sounds really good.
I don't know if anyone else wants to add.
And just before we continue with anything else, we do have microphones. They're currently off because they're not needed for the live streaming and the recording. However, if anybody has any problems hearing anything, please just let us know and we can turn all the mics on.
Sounds good.
And I generally try to run meetings more like a classroom, so if you have a question, please just raise a hand or something and we'll try to let you ask it or voice your opinion as appropriate. So please, carry on.
I was just going to say, I didn't know if you'd be able to provide more of an update on the solar arrays.
Sure, so I can give you the most detail that I have on it in talking with the developers. The short version is that they are frustrated and trying to move as quickly as possible without being further delayed by delays from other parties. In short, the large transmission line upgrade project that I believe you guys had a presentation done for you as well, just like we did. That transmission project is causing some delays and questions as to the interconnect and how that will happen for the interconnection agreement. And until they have that worked out, that's why they haven't been able to finalize site planning, sizes, et cetera, to provide the towns with more information. They are moving forward with all of the things that are seasonally dependent, such as additional wildlife and other sorts of things, and trying to move forward before studies they've already done expire. And I don't remember exactly which ones, but there are some that I think next year, if they don't start something by then, they would have to redo some things. But that's the gist of it, is they're basically trying to hammer down the interconnection agreement so that they can move forward. They have extended lease options with various parties, I believe including the towns, so that they are able to delay and push out, so they paid to say we can start the lease again later than we had originally intended. I don't think it was
That's not
much,
ringing the
but
bell with me. They're in the option year now.
yes.
There were additional option years in the
Well,
agreement?
like, they had paid for that option year to be in
Yeah.
it, because they are intending to move forward. Whether that will be enough, whether they will be forced to have delays or not, I couldn't say, but they're intending to move forward and are trying to. So that's about the latest for the status I have on that.
Okay, well, that's more than I know.
The quarterly updates are kind of boilerplate from them.
Very.
Uninformative.
But, yeah, so they're trying to work together with the large transmission upgrade project to make everything work and to put things in place so that when/if the transmission project gets approved, that it doesn't further affect or set back the solar project and so on, but,
Okay. All right. Thank you.
yeah.
If I could just, first of all, I echo what Sabrina said, and thank you for hosting us here. It's really nice to see all you guys in person. I think from my personal perspective, I feel like that we're here because we're having some challenges at the transfer station for a couple different reasons. And so we are hoping, as Brini said, to start a dialogue with you guys to see what your sort of assessment is of how things are operating at the transfer station, and also to see how open you would be to considering some changes. And some of the challenges that we're seeing are, I'm sure as you guys know, Hopkinton residents are required to use green bags. Webster residents are not. Our respective town meetings, voted, we required that. I don't know if that was even ever put before your voters. And so that's created an issue at the transfer station in terms of ensuring that, I guess enforcement is maybe the short way to say it. In addition, I think this agreement we've had in place since 1975 and looks like amended in 1989, it contemplates there being a refuse disposal committee that plan, develops, manages, and operates the transfer station. Mm-hmm. But my understanding is that in practice, that really hasn't been how the transfer station has been operated. And I think, if I'm correct, that right now there aren't any Webster members on that refuse disposal committee. And so, I think one of the things that I'm hoping that you guys are open to is seeing if there's some change we can make to who is responsible for operation. Because in the absence of that committee, it's really just been, I think, Hopkinton that's been managing and operating the transfer station, which is fine. I don't think we dislike that, but it's just inconsistent with this agreement.
Right. And so I'll make the comment there that we've made a concerted effort to try and have people on the committee until the last batch of resignations, which, again, I think the last 2 or 3 batches of resignations have all resigned because the committee was either not getting information, or even when they did, was not what was making the decisions. So they felt there wasn't a purpose for them. They were just wasting their time because it didn't matter what they said or decided anyway. So I completely agree that the agreement for the committee running the transfer station is not what's been happening. Whether that should or should not be the way that it's done, I think most of us would probably agree it's currently being done in a fairly efficient manner that works pretty well. I'm sure there will be a few people at least that say that there should be a committee that's running it, but in general, I, at least personally, haven't seen issues with that, other than it's not the way that the document says it's supposed to be. I know that when we got those resignations last year, had started the discussions with Neil through Dana about how can we do this better so we're not blindsided by stuff, and also so that we could get the agreements updated. We were prepared to try and bring forth something as a warrant, but there wasn't really time to work something out with you ahead of time.
Yeah.
So maybe we can figure that out for this upcoming year's warrant for an updated agreement of sorts. But that's kind of where we are. Does anybody else want to chime in or add something I've either messed up or forgotten?
No,
I would agree,
really
yeah.
been doing well, I thought. I think the girls do great running it.
Mm-hmm.
I am very impressed.
Thank you.
I think the only thing is to make sure that, you know, as we have to answer to our tax base with the transfer station, is to make sure that if comes about things, major expenses, and maybe there's some way we can put that together, that we have a little bit of a say. I mean, granted, you know, we've always been taught, unless you're 50-50, you don't have that much say, but if we're talking about an agreement and having say on things, just wanna make sure that, you know, and I don't know if maybe we can, and I might be jumping ahead, so don't misconstrue me, but, certain budgetary items that we foresee that, you know, we can have these discussions, or somebody is representing you guys and somebody's representing us. You know, maybe not to say that the local, you know, employment part of it isn't doing a great job. It's just, it would be nice to know that a taxpayer, you know, who is gonna be responsible for paying for the stuff, has a say.
And I want to echo that, where I think it's more that the thing that has been somewhat of a common thread is not that things haven't worked out well. It's that there could be better communication and information flow between everybody involved. And case in point, we were kind of guessing what we might be talking about tonight about the transfer station. So I think we're starting along those lines. I know we had Dana and Neil starting to discuss with each other how they could keep more open communication lines for this sort of thing going forward. But anything that's in a new or updated agreement, I think, should include the way that the towns communicate back and forth, and how things get handled when a need is found, for example. Like, it's one thing to be like, hey, we think we should have X, can we do that within the next 2 years or the next 3 years? It's another to say, we haven't mentioned this, but we're buying it this year, we need more money. And so those kinds of things are very different. And I don't want to try to look into and speak for your municipality, but we do our best to prepare for upcoming payments and never have any bonds or debts. We actually went debt-free last year, having paid off our last bond for the safety building. So we try to plan forward instead of pay backwards. And communication and planning is a huge part of that.
Do you know if your town voted on pay by bag, green bags back in the day? This would have been 2010?
No, not in my knowledge, I don't think we ever have.
I don't know.
I haven't seen any minutes to regard one. I have seen several studies in other parts of the state suggesting that it's actually a bad idea because people throw away a lot more and recycle and compost a lot less when they feel they're entitled by having paid for a bag. When I moved to town, I didn't know that Webster residents didn't need to buy them, so I bought the bags and used them for the first half year that I was living here. So, yeah, I don't really know what to tell you about the bags, other than, I haven't seen it, but I also haven't been in town for, 30-plus years. So,
I was just curious if it had been put to the voters and it was something they had decisively voted on. And so on a similar question, in town, we have the Waste Reduction Committee, which used to be called the Recycling Committee. And I'm curious to know if you have a similar committee that looks at issues of like waste management and recycling and composting, things like that.
We don't really, though, the members that were part of the, whatever the
The
committee
regs,
was called, those members were, in the past, very tied to the Conservation Commission and things like recycling and composting. So that was definitely a push that was coming from our town. Even if we don't have a specific committee for it, because we knew that such a committee did exist. We were getting updated on the, or asking about updates on recycling, for example, when it was getting to the point where it was gonna cost money to do the recycling instead of the other way around, like it is now being a revenue offset. And we were getting prepared to have those conversations, but then it started being revenue again, and so we basically didn't worry about it too much. I know there are some, I can't remember if it's federal, state, or both, but there's some grants for things towards reduction and towards compostables, especially in regards to kitchen scrap compostables. And I would love either more information out of your committees for us to try to act on, or getting the Conservation Commission involved from Webster with that, to like push forward on those sorts of things. I think we do a fair amount of that in Webster already, just individuals that are around town, but it certainly would be a good thing to look at.
Thank you, that's helpful. So, Ken and Thomas, do you have any comments you want to make? If not, I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
maybe we could talk a little bit more about this notion that Stephen was touching on, the refuse disposal committee doesn't really exist, and if you have thoughts on like, should we think about sort of resurrecting that or something similar, or do you think it's just not very useful and we should just sort of strike that concept, well understanding that we need to have good lines of communication open otherwise? And we don't have to decide that tonight, but I just think it's something that we should consider if you're open to it, because it does seem sort of odd to have it laid out in our agreement.
Yeah, I think that's the giant topic that we all need to be talking about and figuring out. And I'm not speaking for anyone other than myself. I personally see kind of 3 ways that it can go. One is that we start to create it and that they actually are doing management by committee, which almost everybody generally agrees is not a very efficient way to do things. The second would be to kind of rewrite it so that such a committee does exist, but they're more of a policy direction, like where do we want to go? Do we want to push more recycling, more composting, more trash reduction, etc. And the third is, of course, kind of the way that I think it's going now, which is basically your DPW is handling it and making sure that everything runs in as efficient and hybrid as a manner, so it's the least expensive possible for both towns. I personally think that as long as communication is good and that there is decent enough representation to be able to say, hey, we're not gonna be able to do that kind of payment that quickly, so tell us about things a little further ahead. I personally think that that's probably the most efficient way for both towns to go, but I completely understand the desire for more official representation as well, which is why that kind of middle with having a oversight committee sort of thing also makes some sense. I'm gonna be quiet now though, because I said my 2 cents and let everybody else talk.
So I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh,
I'll come off that.
I think like the three kind of scenarios you laid out sound about right, and I think that we're definitely in that third option now, and it sounds from your perspective, and certainly from my perspective, the people who are running it seem to be doing a good job, if not slightly under-resourced, but they certainly keep the place running, which is great. I think, and I like to think of these more in an abstract form, but I think sometimes examples are helpful, and I think that the green bag example, specifically about how operating in the future, the green bags is a helpful example. In a scenario where we wanted to change the green bag program, and for example, we needed to change the operation of the transfer station to make it easier to enforce and change, not necessarily impacting Webster residents at all, but if there was a situation that arose where there's some change in the way that it was operating that costs more money, that's something that if Webster's not being involved in, they shouldn't have to bear the cost of that. That's an entirely Hopkinton decision. We voted on it multiple times. That's something if we wanted to push forward. But I think that it's a good example of how the types of problems that need to get figured out, that can't really get figured out if DPW is left alone to operate, because they don't have any way of making those decisions without impacting you, which wouldn't be fair. And so I think that it's sorting out those types of problems about how those types of things can get figured out, agreed upon by both parties, and then pushed forward.
So you're kind of saying the daily operations is like it's been happening, which is your DPW. If there's something, you know, and I don't know if we set like a level of a purchase or something that's needed, or a cost that is shown its ugly face, let's say, or whatever, that there be that committee, in a sense. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well,
or am
so
I
I think it's,
that?
I mean, that's potentially the idea. I think it's more about whatever solution we push forward has to be able to solve those types of problems.
Right.
And the situation we have now can't solve those problems. It's kind of completely frozen to do that. And so, again, I don't like using green bags as an example, but there's many different ways to solve that. It could be additional people. It could be changing opening times. It could be changing the hopper. There's lots of different ways that could happen, and coming up with the best solution that works best for both parties, but then also doesn't unfairly impact one party. That's the kind of thing that I don't know how to solve right now. And yeah.
Yeah, so the green bag thing, I like to kind of agree with you that it's an example, but it's not a really good one. But you did just touch on another one, which is, you know, what if the residents want the hours to change? And part of that is, yes, it's a decision by someone or some group or some department. I would certainly hope that before such a decision would be made, that they would at least ask the two select boards, for example, if not asking as a straw poll at both town meetings or whatever, if they wanted the additional hours. But at the end of the day, at least under current agreements, it's basically whatever the operating costs are and operating revenues are split based on the percentages of the towns, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure is 25-75, which roughly matches our populations. And if the decision does get made to be open for more hours and that costs more money, well, that's a service that both towns are getting. So it's not like it's an inadequate, unequal thing, unless it was just a decision made without any consultation or discussion within the other towns. So I think that's probably a better example than the green bag one.
Yeah, I agree.
One thing we're not talking about is the budget and the operating budget and the capital budget. And say on the capital budget, we do plan out 20 years. And I believe we've had representatives of your board to our meetings when we go over the budget for the transfer station. So,
For
what
at
I'm
least the
hearing is
operating
that,
budget portion, yes.
okay, then maybe that could be expanded. That seems like it's a communications problem that is more easily fixed than some other things.
Yeah. I would think that, especially the long-term forecast things, whether it was someone dropped a ball, whether it was assumptions that the committee was taking care of it and communications or not, but like, we heard stuff from our CIP like, well, this is news, we hadn't planned for this, that there's this upcoming thing. We hadn't heard about that the previous year. So things of that nature are rather shocking when we hear them from our CIP committee. Not that everybody on the CIP committee is always the same people, and of course, we've also had administrative turnover through the pandemic, so not pointing to anybody or anyone or any location, but to your point, the communication is like, let's make sure we have it so that the towns can plan in this future manner like we should be.
You just confirmed something that I was wondering in my mind, is whether Webster has a capital improvement committee. And it's nice to hear that you do, because I think that's one place where, our capital improvements committee and yours could probably communicate better when it comes to this, so that both towns can plan ahead.
I will say
those sorts of
ours is not
expenses.
normally stood up except for right around budgeting time.
Yeah,
That's the case for us.
yeah, yeah. And I think that, when we're talking about how, we could also improve communications, when, I don't know how best to propose it, but just in a really abstract sense, when either one of us is considering capital improvements to the transfer station, that seems like that's a time when both boards ought to be involved in that process, because it does impact, the long-term planning for both of our towns. And, Ken just mentioned another point that I think we should keep in mind, and that's the difference between capital costs and operating costs. And in terms of however we structure this going forward, it seems to me that, the operational costs should not necessarily have the same sort of pre-approval process that the capital costs would require.
Well, the operating budget should be pre-approved, but then once that's approved, then giving whoever's running it more flexibility, but maybe if there's an unexpected large expenditure, that should be communicated.
Yeah.
Way ahead, too.
Well, if it's unexpected, I don't know how much.
Well, yeah, well, that's true.
So let's use an example that's come up recently, which some people knew about, some people didn't. I kind of heard about some of it because I was asking questions at the transfer station, just as we were starting to go into budgeting. But the whole, we're gonna get one trailer. Well, the pricing that we've been given is really good, so we're gonna spend a little more and get 2 trailers. Now the pricing is through the roof, so we're spending even more, but we're gonna only get 1. And like this whole, and it's certainly not Hopkinton's fault that, or anybody in any of the organization's fault that prices got stupid. But like trying to follow and figure that out, the only reason I was able to provide some of that color towards some of our folks in town was because every single time I'm at the transfer station, I ask them what's going on. And as much as I like talking to the folks at the transfer station, I shouldn't have to do that for our town to know what's up.
Absolutely.
And those are the kinds of, like, it was, I think 3 times within the same year that changed as to what's going to happen, and all of that should have been through both town CIPs, at least as a recommendation of how to do it. And so that's that kind of like, how do we clarify that? Because obviously sometimes opportunistically it's gonna make sense to get two instead of one if the prices are really good. But how do we clarify like a process to do that, I think is what's gonna need to go into the agreement.
Yeah, and sort of in defense of the CIP committee or committees, is the last 2 years have been crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And
Totally not
like you
their
said,
fault.
prices have gone through the roof, and and you know, on the other side, we're telling them, well, tax impact, we've gotta keep, you know, costs down.
Mhm.
So there have been changes. I'm not on the CIP committee.
Just operationally, so I can understand how that has to happen. So like the trailer example, that's a CIP item,
Yeah.
non-operational budget item.
Usually, because that would be a long-term expense.
So, but both towns need to vote on that at town meeting, right? So we would need to vote on it as a CIP item?
No.
So CIP, so the way it works, I can only speak for us.
Yeah.
The way the CIP works is basically they take into all the account of this stuff.
Right.
Give us a report and a recommendation of how much they're thinking per year.
Yep.
And we bring that forward with minor tweaks
Yep.
to the voters to put into our various expendable trust and capital reserve funds.
Yep.
To be able to then expend when it's needed. Other towns I know do like, well, we're gonna put this up as a bond, et cetera.
Right.
We don't do that.
But, so like,
But the capital improvement plan and the committee for it, they would have done the research, they would have voted on what this should be and what the dollar amounts are likely to be for the next 5 years to get or the next 10 years to get the trailer in 10 years, because we've already just replaced them now.
totally. So where I get curious is operationally, if one CIP recommends a new trailer and the other CIP does not recommend a new trailer, and doesn't budget for those two things, what do we do? And I don't expect that to come up, but that's like the operationally, those are the types of problems that we just don't have answers to.
Yeah, and so that's been one of the things with, is there a committee, is there not?
Right.
Is it just Hopkinton telling us what's supposed to happen because it's the DPW basically running it? And that's where kind of this, I don't wanna call it contention, but contention with versus the agreement has come up, where, well, you told us you were gonna get one trailer, now you want us to pay more and get two. And so let's say, and I don't know whether it happened exactly that way or not, but let's say your CAP committee said, yeah, prices are probably gonna be good, let's put aside twice as much this year and that'll probably get us two trailers. And ours said, well, prices were really good, so we don't need to put as much towards the one trailer that we're supposed to get. Let's say that happened. What that means is that we don't have the funds to be able to pay you when you wanna buy
Right,
the extra.
right.
But that doesn't mean that, like, there isn't a long-standing, long-term outlook that we should be paying the 25-75 split towards these capital items, because they are needed. It's just when and how often. And a lot of that was, well, the committee's supposed to decide what both towns are going to say is what they're supposed to do, not one set feels that we should have it, one set feels we shouldn't, and, well, the towns that are in impasse. That's the whole point of voting as a committee, which doesn't happen because running anything by committee is not great, so.
Yeah, I mean, and also in the committee, the current structure is 3 and 3, so even the committee can still have a split that wants it. Yeah.
If we were to move forward with something like you mentioned, David, I think, something more of like a policy body and maybe more of an advisory role, do you think you would be able to find people to be on that? I'm concerned about the sort of the last few years not being able to find people, and I understand it sounds like it was not really like a committee that was really running and having a clear agenda and things like that, but and if you think there's concerns over finding people to fill that, do we then move to a point where it's like the select boards have to have people sit on the committee to make sure we're communicating regularly? It's just sort of a practical question.
I don't know, because it's, and I'll look over here, because some of you have more experience in town than I do.
Yes?
But
Oh, me. Been here
We,
forever.
we've had a very active set of residents for lots of things. Much like most places have seen since the pandemic, they've been less so. So I really don't know how to answer that question. Maybe you have a better idea.
Well, I think we've been really lucky to get volunteers for a lot of things. Of course, I beg people sometimes. I used to be in charge of like the old home day in Webster for many years, and I did my time of begging, you know, so they would listen, so that's good. But I think you have to ask people. That's the thing. We have to know what we need, and I think asking is a good thing. I also write at the local paper in Webster, so I have a little in there, and, you know, I love to see volunteers, so.
And I think just, as this is one of my first somewhat volunteer situations as a business owner, I think just understanding, I mean, everybody's busy, their lives are busy, but, you know, when they're tax-based and they want services and they want things to happen, you know, they just gotta understand, you know, and maybe it wouldn't present it like this, but do you want, just how can you decide this, right? So it's just, to me, it's presentation of what, and same with you guys, you don't wanna have to make all the, you know, you don't wanna be in that position either, so. I think some of it's just representation of what is needed and what people are willing to give up for their time, and understanding the outcome of it, you know? You know, which means, you know, hey, having a say in
Yeah.
something you're doing every day.
And
Or not every day, the bigger amount, it's like we were talking about.
And I guess that kind of goes back to also, like, what is the purpose of the committee and what are they gonna do? Because if you're trying to run the transfer station, like is kind of in the agreement, you have to take a ton of time, all the time, to have any chance of coming even close to doing some of it. But if it's, we're gonna set long-term goals, long-term directions, advice to the CIPs of what we think is actually needed, and that sort of thing, that's probably not even a every other month kind of meeting. And you probably don't need a committee of 6, 7, 8, 9 people. I mean, it could probably, and I'm just spitballing here, but it could probably be a 3-member committee.
That's what I was thinking
And-
earlier too.
And then the agreement could be written that Webster Select Board must provide 1 representative. And, well, if we don't show up, we don't get a vote. And if we can't provide somebody, one of us should probably show up. But if not, then there's no vote. The downside there is, of course, then, well, let's say your select board puts 2 select board people on it and we put 1 select board person on it, then it's still whatever Hopkinton says according to the voters. So I don't know how that gets solved, but even with 1 out of 3, that's a larger representation than the amount that we pay. So,
And I think, again, like the everyday operating budget is one thing, just like in the town, just like anything. Or in a business, you have people that, you know, try to make that happen. And then anything that's larger, where we have to answer, just like you guys have to answer to your taxpayers, at least we all have, you know, we're not letting somebody that may not be a taxpayer, that may be just an employee, you know, not just an employee, God, don't take me wrong, you know, a very well, and, you know, informal person. It just means at least you got, it's your dollar that's at stake.
But it sounds a lot like restructuring and being much more specific about the purpose and responsibilities of the committee could be a pretty good way for pathing forward.
And the structure of the committee.
The structure, and then I also think it's probably worth figuring out what happens if there's large monetary decisions that need to be made, how those specifically get made. Because I think it's one thing for the committee to recommend a new hopper, for example, like some extremely large cost. But but like you said, if that's 1-2 vote, that still needs to be a joint decision between CIPs and the select boards and the towns. So having some process for much larger decisions.
Webster likes to, oh, I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so that actually brings up the whole point of, if we're gonna put that structure in place, we don't need the committee. Because what the committee says at that point is not how it's gonna happen anyway.
Well, I think that there's a lot of other things that are worth having a smaller committee be able to make recommendations that we can act on. So, maybe not opening hours is the right, but like, number of staff, for example.
How about like a dump fee too?
Yeah.
Who comes up with
Who
like
comes
the
up with
dump
that?
fee? So let's say you have a commercial guy that picks up dump and then
I
brings it
think
in.
those are part of our agreements, and so they actually have to be ratified by the voters.
The dump fee?
No, I don't.
There's something in the agreement about them, it's like
Is
an
there?
addendum to the agreement or something like that.
For,
Maybe our administrators can clarify.
I think the two boards can adopt, but
two boards can
it takes
adopt.
both boards.
Yeah, we raised those rates a couple of years ago, if I recall.
I know Webster likes to plan way ahead, so like, you wanna buy a trail or something, we like to know, like, because we like to put money aside, we don't get bonds and all that, we finally paid our bond off for our safety bill, so, and I've been in town for way long, and that's the way it's always been, they wanna plan ahead, so if we know you're gonna do a new hopper, whatever the heck it is, if we can know a few, years, we can plan and put a little, it's a lot easier to put a little money aside every year than the, oh God, we need 100,000 or 200,000 in 1 year. That Webster residents will not like that.
That's the approach that Hopkinton takes.
Okay.
I'll say though, the exception is roads. Roads is a whole different issue.
Especially after this last weekend.
Do you have a lot of complaint, I think personally that runs pretty well. I mean, when I go to the dump and everybody's nice and, it runs, you don't have a big lineup usually, it kind of runs pretty well. So do you have a lot of complaints from Hopkinton people?
I think, as far as I know, it's just that a lot of residents don't use green bags.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I at least don't hear much about the operations. I think most people agree that it runs quite well. Green bags are a big topic of conversation in town. So one thing I do wanna just put out there and just ask a very basic question is, curious to know if you think there would be any appetite to put something like that to your voters. I mean, obviously, David, you mentioned like you've seen things saying it actually is not helpful in terms of recycling. I think our waste reduction committee at least and others would say, they believe strongly that it's important to help reduce waste using that system. So I'm just curious, because I don't think it's anything we've really ever talked about. So I'm just putting out that very basic question.
Again, just speaking for myself personally, I would have no problems with that going on a warrant article. That being said, I could certainly see it with the types of folks that are in town that just want as little as possible to do with anything government, that it would have not the easy slam dunk chance to pass.
And that's fair. I think one of the things we heard was like, well, have you even asked Webster? And our answer was no, really. So the green bag situation feels like an issue we just can't seem to solve, but we are working on things related to enforcing them that we hope will help, enforcing the use of them. And I would say one other sort of bigger picture comment is, I do think I hear from people like, they want us to be thinking not just about operations, but sort of bigger picture, how are we gonna manage the huge waste issues that are before us now and gonna only get worse. And then one example is the Waste Reduction Committee has brought up this idea of doing like a composting pilot. So we've started that discussion. And so I think that's an example where if we had some sort of committee that, because one of the issues I think I or someone else brought up was like, well, how would we loop Webster in on this? And so I know folks in Hopkinton have been trying to do a lot of education around recycling and how to properly put your recycling in the various bins, and composting would be an example where we would, and we haven't decided if we're going that route or not, but it's just one example where we would need to educate people about how to take part in this pilot. So that might be a place where having some sort of committee might be helpful.
So when we do like the blue bags, in a sense, where it's usually around town meetings, correct, or they have Earth Day, and we
Yeah,
go
that's,
around. I mean, granted, it's very small to the green bag thing, but
well, so
I know the COMCOM's very involved in that, so that's what I was
yeah,
throwing out there.
well, I don't think that's really a monetary thing. I think that's so for
We talking
us, the
monetary
blue
thing?
bag thing is when our conservation commission comes up roughly around town meeting time and reminds everybody at town meeting that we're gonna do spring cleanup of our roads. We hand out blue bags, everybody goes and cleans up stuff around their roads, and they bring them back, and so on and so forth. And so it's not like we're, I don't think, paying a fee someplace to get them, other than that we've bought bags that are blue.
True, and we don't tell them what they have to
and-
put in the blue bag.
Right, because it's
which is
anything
the
that's,
green bag is
anything that's on the
probably-
side of the road.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I could see would be interesting is when looking at the agreement to account for things like the green bag program. For the way that the agreement is now, it's that standard 25-75 split for operating costs, long-term costs, and revenues. But there would certainly be, let's say we tried to get a green bag program and people refused it. If that happens, I could certainly see that there would then be both revenues from the green bags that are only associated with Hopkinton,
which is the case now.
but also costs associated with enforcing that, yeah, you've got a green bag, we're checking this, we're taking the time to do it, that are also only associated with Hopkinton. And so the agreement should have a way of handling that. So like if Hopkinton decides we want to do this and enforce it, you can take on that, and it's like, we don't want to stop you from doing whatever it is you want to do. We just don't want to get caught in the we have to do it or pay for it anyway kind of situation. So I think there's a way in, and I'm not trying to come up with language now, but I think there's probably a way in the agreements to account for that kind of thing.
There's an argument that because of our town using green bags, we're incenting people to recycle more, thus saving money in terms of the trash in tonnage. So, but we're not taking advantage of that cost savings. And, so if you go down that road, there are issues either way.
So, I just want, how does your green bag work? People buy the bags and then that's it, so you get the money, the town gets the money.
Yes.
And so, but people don't have to use that if they go from Hopkins, do they?
So
It's
it's,
supposed to.
the breakdown breaks widely based on how you take your trash to the dump. So right now you go to the store and you buy green bags, and there's two sizes of green bags. A large bag, it costs more, and a small
okay.
bag, it costs less. The way it's supposed to work is you have to use those green bags. If you're a Hopkinton resident and you take your trash to the dump, you have to use those green bags. The issue is right now, there's no enforcement because we don't have the staff of this transfer station to enforce it.
You don't have a policeman at the door.
Right, so
You don't have a green bag, out of here, throw it on the road. No.
So our best estimates is somewhere around 10 to 15% of town is actually using the green bags. It gets even more complicated because a sizable portion of town pays for curbside pickup. And
Oh,
so
the town does pay for?
No.
Oh, does it? Oh.
People
a sizable portion of residents pay for curbside pickup. And then it gets even more complicated. We do have a town ordinance that specifies that any hauler bringing residential trash from Hopkinton to the transfer station must only use green bags or only pick up green bags. That gets complicated because there's also haulers that don't go to the Hopkinton transfer station. So there's multiple layers of breakdown. that make it very complicated.
That's nothing simple.
No.
No, in life.
I think it's also worth noting too, I mean, your statement about you, not necessarily a bad thing to put on the warrant, but could be a difficult thing, not a slam dunk. That very much echoes Hopkinton. It was something to put on that we put on the warrant that was absolutely not a slam dunk, that then went through multiple years of should we keep it or should we not keep it, 10 years of should we keep it or not keep it. And I think at the stage we're at now, the majority, based on the voting, wants to keep it. However, most people are fed up with the low usage and low enforcement and all those things. So in terms of like your question of do we hear a lot of complaints about the operation of the transfer station?
Well, I was gonna say, if most people want to do it, why would you have to have enforcement?
If most people do it?
Yeah, meaning we want to.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's a fair statement.
Well,
You hear
Well,
from
do you
20
see,
people
you
who
see
don't
where I'm
wanna do
stepping?
it.
I'm not
No,
saying
no,
that
no.
you're not true. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that was like,
I fully would agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think, so in terms of most people want to keep it, that's the way it votes, that's the way the vote drops at the town meeting. The majority says they want to keep it. I think there's
But it's been very close. There's been some years where it's been like minuscule.
Not a slam dunk,
And we have
yeah.
5% of the voting population shows up to town.
And I think there's also a huge aspect of why, if no one else is doing this, why am I going to be the only person doing it? And I think back to your statement of like, do we hear a lot of complaints about the operation of the transfer station? I think we don't hear a lot about like the people running it and how it's run and your ability to go there and dispose of waste. But as we've started to dig into trying to find more solutions to the specific green bag program, which again, hate using it as an example, but as we dig into what the numbers are and how the different people use the program, and there's all these kind of other questions that pop up, and a lot of other ideas like composting or improving recycling, and it's hard when there are ideas that come forward, but then it feels like it hits a bit of a brick wall, because we can't really do anything without a good cooperation between the two towns, and how do we push that forward if there's not a committee in place to help facilitate that? And yeah.
And I have a stupid question. The green bags, do they disappear, you know, when you put them in the dump, do they just disappear?
Also a valid complaint. I mean, they do replace your normal trash bag, so instead of
Yeah,
buying a
right,
trash
right,
bag,
yeah, so
but-
unless you bring your brown bags, you know, in little brown bags and throw them in
Right.
there, but that's pretty impossible, but,
Yeah.
so.
my biggest concern too would still be that, like, I think we all, the turnout sometimes we have in our towns. And I could be one of them that would sit here calling the kettle black, though. Oh, I was here every meeting, you know, so I get that. It's a lot of people's understanding of it, or I don't wanna do that, and whoop.
Yeah.
That would be my biggest concern, personally.
Well, yeah,
But I get what you're saying too. I mean, it's like getting the classroom to get along. I don't know.
That's true.
If you can figure it out, good for you.
The only way you could beat that is if you had, like Concord with the disposal trash trucks going and picking up everybody's, and then that's gonna be a big
Its own
kick
thing,
for
right.
Hopkinton, yeah.
And I think like when it comes back to the question of if the major decisions are happening from communication between these two committees and the CIPs, there's still a lot there for an active committee to do. I mean, certainly not like an everyday type of job, but there's certainly a lot of these little things that are helpful to try to figure out communication.
So, not that we're gonna solve all of the problems now, but I'm an engineer and I like to try to figure things out. The kind of three things that I'll point out, and I'll get them all out and maybe someone can answer some of them. The first one would be, the green bag program comes up because people are unhappy with how it works, whether it's because they want it, don't want it, how it works. What is the actual percentage of revenue that green bags get you? The second one is if you're having problems with, for example, people getting pickups and so on and so forth, why is that a problem for green bags and not just, well, it's a tipping fee, just like everybody else that brings trash? Like, that seems like it would solve the problem equitably no matter what. And the third one would be, you know, you mentioned that these are the kinds of things that the committee could kind of figure out. except that that has to go back to the voters. And so if the voters don't agree, it still doesn't solve the problem. So kind
Yeah.
of, I don't know if you wanna,
So the first two are relatively easy. The third one's kind of hard. So the first one, last year's revenue from greenbacks was $60,000. So pretty small. It started at a substantially higher number than that, but last year revenue was $60,000. So very low. The second one, in terms of moving from greenback collection over to tipping fees. So the main purpose of the greenbacks is not to pay for waste. It's to reduce the amount of waste going into the transfer station. And the way that it's theoretically done is by charging by an individual bag. An individual has an individual incentive to reduce the amount of waste that they are producing. So if you transfer that to the tipping fees, which is basically how it's done now, you're sharing that cost with everyone who's associated with that hauler. And so if half the town is paying the same rate, it doesn't really matter how much I personally, there's no incentive for me to reduce any given week or anything like that. So it solves the revenue problem, but it doesn't solve the purpose of what the greenbag is for. And then for the third one, in terms of I would say that that committee wouldn't really be able to fully solve greenbacks, because I think that's a larger structural problem with how the revenue breakdown and how all of the larger operational issues. But what was interesting is, as we've been trying to look at some of the solutions, there's been a lot of potential things that could offer improvements that are not necessarily big things, but little things, like the composting trial, like doing a composting trial. That's not necessarily solving the greenbag program, but it's an idea that came up as we looked at solutions. And that's something that could be pushed forward by a committee, but right now there's no method for pushing that sort of idea forward, or even communicating it across the boards. Hopefully that was.
Can I just, two things, I personally would like to see you guys put something to your voters asking about green bags, and that's completely your decision, but I'm just saying from where I'm sitting in, the issues we're dealing with, it would be wonderful if everybody was sort of on the same playing field in dealing with this. To that end, depending on when you schedule your business session, I would hope, and this is way down the road, but someone from our town could go to answer questions about how the green bag system works in town, so that at least people, when they're voting and they're informed about how it would work. So that's the green bag thing. The other thing that I wanted to toss out there, which I don't think we've really talked about yet, but I wanted to flag for you guys to think about, was, right now we're talking about making changes to this agreement, right? And it says in there that to do that, it's got to go to both of our town meetings to amend it. I think there's a lot of pros and cons to that. I would suggest that going forward, it not require going to town meeting. That it be something that either the joint select boards could amend, or this committee that we're talking about. I just think it would be far more efficient that if these big picture issues come up in the future, that this is a much easier document to amend than the way it's currently set up. So I just wanted to get that out there among the many different things we've talked about that we need to address sort of going forward for you guys to think about.
I'm just throwing this out there, but as we talk about the green bag, and I'm kind of understanding what you guys are talking about, I don't know if it's a concern, but I think just like when you buy organic food, just when you pay for renewable energy, it's more money, right? I'm not sure that's telling somebody they're gonna save money by putting it in a green bag in a sense, right? Wait, well, hold on, because you wanna say, well, put your trash over,
It's a hard,
hold on. You wanna recycle this, do this, and put it here and put it there, which I get, which would be great, because just like people that, or the way we're trying to save our earth in a sense, organic, renewable, all those kinds of things, those all are an extra cost. So people do it because that's they wanna try to save their environment, in a sense, right?
Yep.
So, I think what I'm trying to say is, I don't know if people, oh, you buy a green bag and you're gonna save a little bit going to a fee at the trash, I don't know if that's incentive enough to create recycling. But I
So,
could be
no,
wrong.
I agree with you 1,000,000%. Like every time I look at it, I'm like, well, is this actually gonna work and all this stuff? And I'm, yeah, right? Because it's like you're actually paying more money. Like the purpose of the bag is to cost more money than if you were not paying for the bag. Like that's the purpose of it. The one thing I will say is like if you look at all the other towns that do it, the individual cost varies, but the town produces significantly less waste. So like when Concord moved over to purple bags, their waste basically over the course of a month dropped in half. And it's like if you look at almost every other town, actually I think every other town that institutes something like this, the numbers work out well. And so it's hard when we have voted on it, we decided as a town we want to do it, and it doesn't work out well for us at all, and we're the one outlier, and the one big glaring reason is because we are a joint transfer station that's hard to enforce. And so it's trying to solve some of those issues. But again, in terms of the structural issues, to me, green bags is like it's like a symptom of some of the issues. It's not the issue. Like green bags is not what we need to fix. We need to fix some stuff so that we can solve issues like green bags.
I guess I'll go back to the agreement thing. You mentioned that it probably shouldn't be with the voters, and I would argue that the agreement is supposed to be the overall arcing large, big picture thing that should go through the voters, but it needs to be structured so that, like, we're talking about restructuring how everything works, and so that should go back to the voters. But it should be structured in a way that the everyday operations, the planning for long-term purchases, that shouldn't have to go to the voters all the time, other than, yeah, this is what is recommended to our funds by CIP, so we don't pay a whole lot later on. Like, that's the kind of breakdown, and so I just want to voice my personal opinion that I think the agreement probably should stick with being amended by the voters, but as long as we craft it reasonably right, unless there's an implosion of like a committee or something like this, it really shouldn't need to be amended again.
I would generally personally agree with that. It's like if we can do a good job outlining specifically what a committee should be doing and ways that we then take recommendations from the committee and decide on specific things across the boards, then there shouldn't be a reason to have big issues have to go to town meeting.
We're still talking about a committee just being advisory.
Well, so the way that the agreement currently is, they're not supposed to be advisory.
Going forward.
And so, and the whole thing for me with the committee is, if it's advisory, a lot of the people that would think they would want to do it are going to find, well, who cares what I say? It's just something that's advisory, and I'm not making a difference anyway. And so we'll have a tougher time filling that committee portion. But also, if it's just advisory, then whoever they're going to give the advice to should just get the information to make the decision. And then we don't have to deal with it. Because then all of these problems for like who gets to make a decision, who's trying to focus on stuff, if they're just advisory, they're advising different people that aren't necessarily going to agree anyway, so it doesn't solve anything.
But what about the notion that, like, the example I brought up earlier, and Thomas brought it up about composting, like that's an example where if we had some sort of committee where you could provide, like, well, we're thinking of this, like, what does Webster think of this? And if we move forward with it, like, you can then offer education to your residents. So maybe it doesn't need to be a committee, maybe it's just the select boards talking, but it does seem to me that it would be useful to have some process, like to your points earlier, is that communication has not been super clear. I think if we can, either, whether it's a committee or something else, we just have a clear way of dealing with things like that, you know, I guess at this point, we don't really have a clear process.
So I certainly want to hear what everybody else has to say on that. My point there would be that at the end of the day, if it's something that is going to cost money, the select boards have to be the ones to approve it. Or in your case, depending on costs, it might fall to DPW, can make the choice before going to the select board. But like, it kind of eventually has to come to the select boards, and we have to know about it and understand it anyway. So we might as well make sure that the communication goes between the town administrators and the select boards so we can do that. And case in point, there's a bunch of grant and other opportunities right now specifically to push composting. And no committee can go apply or try to do any of that. It would have to be the select boards or administrators for the towns to do that. So in the end, I think it has to be us anyway. But please someone tell me I'm wrong, because I'm all about delegation when it makes sense.
No, we're the bottom line, I mean, really, like you said, we're the ones that have to try to get things for the town.
I'm curious if kind of one of the issues is how this agreement states the operation, and I don't think, it feels like when this agreement was first initiated, it wasn't necessarily one town's DPW or the other town's DPW, it was, we're just jointly gonna operate it. And now we're in a scenario where it's been, like the day-to-day operation has been more or less taken over by DPW, which is fine. Or maybe not fine, but conceivably fine. And it's just that if that's the way we want to move forward, we can just specify that. So that committee can do certain things, or we can specify how the budget process has to go through both boards. But separating that out, that like day-to-day operation from that committee, so that the committee can be more specific.
I just want to stop for a second. We had a hand. Please state your name and town and what you wanted to say.
Bonnie Christie, I'm from Hopkinton. I'm the chair of the Waste Reduction Committee, co-chair with Pat LaPree. The three of us are Waste Reduction Committee members. As you're discussing, you know, advisory versus, you know, operational, whatever, the select boards probably don't want to do all the work of research. So you could benefit from having an advisory committee to come up with options. For example, the state, as of last fall, came up with waste reduction goals statewide to reduce the overall waste that is brought to landfills and incinerators in New Hampshire by 25% by 2030 and reduce it by 45% by 2050. Now, how you get there is where an advisory committee come in and say, okay, I mean, any town could say, well, we're not going to even do that. No. But if each town wants to be part of achieving this goal for the state, then how are you going to get there? And so I know the select boards have to deal with all kinds of stuff, so it would probably be helpful to have an advisory committee to do the research and the homework and come up with options and say, these are the things that we have researched, this is the top thing that we recommend. You guys can take it or leave it, but it doesn't leave you guys, you know, having to do all the work. Like I think it might be useful for the town to have a 5-year solid waste management plan, which of course can, you know, if you have another pandemic or something and things change, you can always tweak it. But right now we have no plan. It's just like whatever. And our waste went up over a 10-year period of over 20%. Our total waste that's brought to the transfer station went up over 20%. all our population went up less than 6%. So something's not, we're not doing something right. And, you know, answering those questions and solving those riddles is something that an advisory committee can help with.
So I will say that's a completely fair point and a great use for an advisory committee. And I'm responding just because I feel like I'm kind of the one that said it didn't need to be there, and you just gave me the yes, it does. But anybody else chime in. And I guess my point isn't that an advisory committee shouldn't exist or is bad. My point is that an advisory committee on how to run or set policy for the transfer station, if there's no binding towards the two select boards having to make similar or the same decisions, or the voters having to make the decision together, doesn't solve any of the problems we're trying to solve with rewriting the agreement. And part of that is, for example, if we wanted to do green bags, let's say neither town was doing green bags right now. If we wanted to do green bags, I don't think it would necessarily have to be one select board and the other both saying, yes, we definitely want to do this, and then putting it forward to voters, because the voters may say different things. I think it's that a joint and appropriate warrant article would be put forward that would say, we will vote to do this contingent that the other town does as well, so that you're guaranteeing that there's lockstep for any kind of monetary change, unless the towns have decided, well, we're just going to do this for ourselves. But that's, again, the committee for the transfer station, and again, not to go back towards, you know, reduction is great, and I think everybody should be on that train. I know our Conservation Commission has been on that train, but I don't know how much, if any, overlap there is, because they're busy on other things as well. But I'm trying to look at the agreement in solving that problem instead of, like, in making it so that it works in a fair and equitable way for the towns. And I don't think that, like, the advisory committee could say, we think this should happen. And maybe we say, yeah, we want that program, and you say, no, we don't. Well, the real problem is what happens then. It's not, and having a committee or not doesn't solve that. And I think a lot of people's thinking is that, well, just by having a committee that solves it, because they've already decided one thing together between the towns, and the problem is it doesn't.
Listening, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so.
I was gonna say, listening to you say that, I mean, it makes me think that we ought to have some version of a refuse disposal committee, and they ought to have some authority to make decisions about this, because I'm afraid about what you just described, where, you know, the Webster members and the Hopkinton members, respectively, if it's our boards or our CIP committees or even our voters, can't necessarily decide on what to do and how to solve some of these issues. That makes me think that, you know, it ought to be the refuse disposal committee, and it should be an odd number of people who have a vote on that, and you know, both towns are have to adhere to whatever that vote is, because the sort of the logjam is what, you know, I want to avoid if we can, but I recognize that there are a host of challenges by doing it that way, just as there are a host of challenges with keeping it advisory. There's just no perfect solution, unfortunately.
And, you know, to the point, I think that's why it kind of stopped being what it was written to be, because it wasn't efficient and things weren't really getting done appropriately. And I don't have the history to back up saying that, so I'm sorry if anybody was on it and trying to get things done or wherever the resistance was. But obviously it's moved to being a DPW thing now for efficiency and costs and a variety of other reasons that just have made sense. And it certainly wouldn't make sense to try and go back to day-to-day operations by a committee. And so it's fine to say that an evenly split committee would be binding, but then we have to make really certain that we're deciding when is it appropriate for DPW to do it, when is it appropriate that they've said we're going to do this and the towns just have to plan for costs, when is it appropriate that the towns have a different say. And to use green bags again, just because, let's say that again, there wasn't a green bag program and they said, we think we should do this. If they're advisory, the articles could be written like, hey, and maybe this is the way it happened, I don't know. Maybe both at the time select boards considered it, and maybe Webster considered writing one that said contingent upon passing and then never brought it forward because they didn't think it was a good idea. And maybe the select board over there decided and thought about writing the contingent upon passing and decided that wasn't worth it because they wanted to do it anyway. That would be perfectly okay, but would put us into this sort of situation.
I don't think it necessarily needs to be one thing or the other. I think that there's clearly a lot of ways in which the current agreement doesn't address scenarios, and I think that we all kind of see that. And going forward, I don't think we're gonna solve every problem tonight, but I don't necessarily think it has to be one thing or the other. It could be, and part of what we could be doing next as this process unfolds is figuring out the things that a committee could have day-to-day useful authority over, the things that really need to come to an agreement between these two boards, and things that really do need to go to the town meetings, and then restructuring this agreement to address those things. I think that it's not going to be an easy, like whatever we come up with, I don't think it'll be as simple as it's written now.
Agreed.
So I think the bigger question to me then is like, what's a good pathway forward? I mean, I think that it's like these are good questions and good debates. It's just, I think it's what's a good way to come up with some good answers that we can have more discussions on. Like, what's a good way to keep moving this forward?
Yeah, and if we do agree on changes, I mean, we're talking about both having to take this to our respective town meetings, so backing out from sometime in March, figuring out a timeline of, like, I think we would have to agree on, the select boards would have to agree and put forward a unified front to our voters. So I don't know if we want to just put another meeting on the books to regroup on this, and each of us could work on what we think is like improved language, or if you have other thoughts on process moving forward.
I'm sorry, was that a hand or?
I got a hand.
Okay, yes, sorry.
Sabrina kind of was touching on what I thought. If there's no, this is the beginning.
Oh, sorry, name and town.
Oh, Ginny Haynes, Hopkinton, and I'm on the Waste Reduction Committee. This is the beginning of a dialogue between the two towns.
Absolutely.
And I'm really happy it's starting. And it's very clear to me there's a lot of things that the towns differ on, and a lot of more information that needs to be exchanged. So I can see that the purpose of a committee and its role in the two towns is unclear at this point. So I would suggest that the select board of Webster and the select board of Hopkinton schedule regular meetings
to discuss this, exchange information until they decide an advisory committee or what path forward they have, because time is ticking. And we're not going to meet the goals that New Hampshire has placed for us without this dialogue and without working together. And whether it's meeting once a month or more or less, I think it's really important for you guys to talk. We haven't seen a member from Webster in a long time, and I would love to see some people. I know some people in Webster that I think would be great candidates.
So I will point out that I stopped because I thought I saw a hand, but what I wanted to ask, and then I'll get back to that in a second, was part of this to me is the two administrators working to help the both boards come together with options and ways to make this happen, and maybe other examples that have worked. What, in your professional opinions, do you think we should be looking at as far as process, timing, et cetera?
Oh, you just passed the buck right there. Did you see that?
That was a
quick. Yeah, right.
First of all, I think as far as something immediate that can help is, I think when our CIPs start meeting, they should meet together to do the transfer station information. It sounds like you use the same process that we use, so there's no reason we couldn't do that together and then have it follow the same process, so you're receiving the exact same information that the Hopkinton board is at the same time. Other than that, I think having large group meetings isn't going to move a process very quickly, and it needs to be a smaller group to start putting things in writing, because it's much easier to discuss things that are in writing that yes, you agree, or you don't agree, or this is what needs to be covered. So I think there needs to be some sort of process to move this along, because I think if you just meet once a month, you're going to be sitting here a year from now, town meeting will have passed, and the same things will still be happening.
I also think you need to focus on what it is you're trying to do, rather than think of it as a huge job. To come up with 2 or 3 things that you want to accomplish in the short term.
I would add probably, I guess I have the longest history at the table at this point. I'm not sure the refuge disposal committee ever worked. Way back, I think starting in the 80s, it sort of became advisory, and certainly the person who was running the transfer station met with the committee regularly, but I'm not sure how many decisions were being made, so I'm not sure that the way it's written ever really functioned, or certainly hasn't for decades.
And I'll recognize you in 1 second. I want to go back to this before I forget again. You mentioned that there were residents in town that you thought would be wonderful for the committee. Is your, is waste reduction committee, is that the proper term? Mm-hmm. Okay. Is the waste reduction committee something that you're expecting that Hopkinton would have one and Webster would have one, or that they meet joint together as an advisory? Like, how has that worked? Should somebody in Webster be interested?
Used to be joint.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sally Embley came to, we used to be called the recycling committee, and Sally Embley was on it for years and years. And she just came to our meetings.
Yeah, it was a joint committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should definitely be joint. Yeah.
Can you make sure that we get the information about their meetings, that it is a joint town thing, and send that to the Conservation Commission? Because they probably would be the best outreach to find somebody that would be appropriate to join them,
Yes.
if they're not already on the committee. And yes.
Hi, Catherine Mitchell from Hopkinton. Just a little historical perspective. I was on the recycling committee when pay by bag was passed. And we did have Sally on the committee at that time, so it was a joint committee, and that seems to have faded away. That was one of the things I was actually going to point out. The other thing in terms of bringing it before town meeting, was that there was a lot more than just putting it on the ballot, and with or without a recommendation from the select board members. The recycling committee did a lot of outreach, and we had multiple public meetings where people could come. We would do a presentation, we would talk about the benefits of it, explain how it would work, and a lot of people would stay after and ask questions. And so leading up to town meeting, I don't know, Bob or Ginny, if you remember how many we did, but I think we had at least three.
Yeah, 3 or 4. We had
3 or 4
presentations.
leading in the many months leading up to it. So, and then we did a presentation at the town meeting as well. And I think it failed the first year and then passed the second year, and then
Yep.
continued to survive some challenges to it for several years after that.
For the purposes of making it easier for us that haven't been here for all of the years in our administration, what were the years on that? So we can go back and try to find any minutes or context for Webster.
It passed in
Remember
town
2012?
meeting 2010.
2010,
It
okay.
was an 8-hour town meeting. It was my first, I remember.
And you're still there.
He was really saying 8 hours, 10 minutes, but he didn't want to put the time, right? Yeah.
And the only other point I wanted to make, and I don't know if Bonnie, you might be able to speak to this. I left my phone at home, so I can't pull up the data. But Bonnie, you had spoke to our select board about a look that someone took, taking a look at the transfer stations of similar-sized communities, and how much waste they produce, how much recycling they produce, and what their costs are every year. And the Hopkinton Webster costs were significantly higher than these other communities, sometimes by hundreds of thousands of dollars, if I remember correctly. So I think that's a real impetus to looking at perhaps getting Webster to do pay-by-bag or whatever solution people come up with, but it's more than just who does pay-by-bag and whether we increase recycling and decrease waste, which we want to do, but there are also tax dollars that are really going into that facility that it seems as though when you look at other communities, don't need to be going into those expenses.
Can you, in light of not having a Webster person on there current, can we make sure that that report gets sent over to us to take a look at and at least have a record of for the town? So that the Conservation Commission, us, et cetera, can look at it, and the CIP?
Sure.
And I would just say NRRA is doing an in-depth study, which we have some preliminary stuff, but as soon as that is done, because I'm not sure that matches what we just heard, so we'll look at that fully.
Okay.
And we'll make sure you get all that information.
Just think about how much our waste is
Increasing
increasing.
to get from you.
That's after people.
So I guess it sounds like we're still talking about
Private.
process.
I think
Sort
so.
of, we've circled back to that now.
Yeah.
And, you know, Neil makes an interesting point about it may not be productive to have our two boards continue to talk about this. And I think I agree that it may be more efficient if we can identify respectively a person or two to work on this for a little while and then maybe jointly meet again and talk about potential changes to this document. So I guess that's what I would propose to you guys to sort of respond to. And you know, unless you really want to do it where it's the two boards meeting again, but I don't think that's going to be as efficient as delegating and having it brought back before our two boards down the road at some point. Keeping in mind that we do want to have that target of the upcoming town meeting in 2025 or 24, excuse me, to work backwards from.
Well, and one approach could be, which I was trying to convey earlier, is like we each go back and however we want to figure it out within our town, whether it's like a subcommittee or, whatever, the full board, come up with language we wanna propose, and then potentially meet again, board to board, you know, sometime like, whatever is reasonable, 8 weeks from now or something, maybe sooner, maybe later, but something like that. Unless, Neil, you had in mind us creating some sort of joint town subcommittee or something.
No.
Well, I mean,
Not necessarily.
It could even just be a representative from each board get together for a bit of time.
Yeah.
To come up with some more of these problems, some more of these potential solutions, and then we can come up with language. And then have have some sort of more concrete framework before we all meet again.
In the spirit of efficiency, and please, everybody, feel free to just tell me no, that's not a smart idea. I would like to suggest that each individual on each board look at this and say, these are the 2 or 3 sections that I have a problem with. These are the 2 or 3 things I think might work to help try to fix that. And get that to our town administrators, who can kind of put it together as a thing, so that each of our boards can look at, this is what we think we need to represent as our town, and then have the town administrators kind of swap and see how that lines up, and if there's anything that, I mean, it might just be a small change in language that makes both of them work, instead of only one. And by allowing, not to pile extra tasks on our administrators, but allowing them to do that communication, we don't have to continually have noticed public meetings and long wait periods and everything else in order to have something that the boards can then look at a meeting in the future, and hopefully have something changed that, at least at that point, is we're close, but we think we should talk about these two areas instead of, we just need to figure out something because this isn't anything like what we're doing. Any thoughts? Is that too much overhead for the administrators? Feel free to say that.
Well, I kind of look at it as we kind of came in this, you know, not quite knowing what was going to come of it, is, you know, we go back with, like you just pointed out, I think saying the same thing you said, but we just, in the next meeting, kind of say, these are our 3 concerns. I mean, 1 or 2, 3 concerns in it, and then Dana goes back and chats with your administrator, and you guys go have your 3, whatever. Maybe there's 10, I don't know. Sounds like there's only a couple. It doesn't sound like a whole lot of, it just sounds to me like there's some language that just needs to be adjusted, and hopefully in just deciding who makes decisions.
Updated a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there's probably some low-hanging fruit that we all agree on, and
Mhm.
then I think there's some thornier things that it's gonna
Right.
take a little more time to work through.
Right. And if we can do the quick process to let them go through, like, okay, this is what basically everybody agrees on, here's the 2 or 3 things that the boards are gonna have to meet and discuss. I think that gets us to where we need to be to have a productive next meeting, instead of we're meeting here and throwing things around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of timeline, maybe we could have sort of a like loose goal of the 2 boards agreeing on any changes to this by like the end of the year. Does that seem reasonable? And however, we need to figure out, backing out from that goal, like when we would wanna come together again.
What do you think?
I think,
The end of the year? Yeah. You don't think we can get it done faster?
she's trying to be, you know, a little bit.
She's trying to
Easy
give us what
over
it
here.
actually
I
is.
would love to get it done sooner, but setting that as like a firm, like, cause then we have to really
Okay.
start thinking about warrant articles, like have that be the, like, drop dead, that's
Yeah,
when we need to
because so
go
you
back.
can
But if we could do it sooner, wonderful.
advertise for the warrant and all that. Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ideally, before budget season would be even better.
That's what I was thinking.
yeah,
Right.
right.
So end of October?
Next week.
That sounds more.
So end of October. But
End of
yeah,
October.
Stuff goes to department heads in 2 weeks.
I would like to agree that it would be ideal that it's done before or during the middle of October. Of course, because of budget season, and then we can also be explaining any changes that may or like how that impacts the town, instead of, yeah, you should all go change this. What? So I think that makes a lot of sense, but from a standpoint of, we are still talking about boards and trying to find times to meet together and do notice and so on. It sounds like a lot of time because it's, you know, a few months out. But it's select boards and it's only a few months out.
Oh, yeah.
So.
No, I like your idea of delegating, but I'm thinking about just, like, I think we obviously will need to come together at least
Right.
once, maybe twice. So if
Yeah.
we wanna, I don't know, maybe try to come together, have something to talk about by, I don't know, early September, mid-September, just to set these goals for our respective boards.
I think mid-September as a next meeting point would be a good, if we do early, we're like in the middle of school start, it's gonna be mayhem. And then if we go to the end of September, I think we're pushing it too far back.
Yeah. So we can finalize the date, but maybe just as throwing this out there, it could be like September. Well, it's hard to find mid since there's Labor Day there, so.
It looks like we have meetings scheduled for the 4th and the 18th
Okay.
in September.
Well, the
Is that
4th is
right?
Labor Day, that can't be
No,
right, so
the
the
5th
11th and the
Yeah,
20th.
the fourth would have been ours, but holidays, so
I
it
think
will
it's
shift.
the 11th and the 25th, right, Neil?
Yes, it's
'Cause we're
second,
no longer
second
there.
and fourth.
Oh, okay. See, I'm glad other people are here.
So maybe the 11th, we could put a pin in.
I think that probably makes sense, at least for me. And
We
it's
can adjust
far
as
enough
needed.
out that
Should we host?
we should be able to have something.
Yeah, something done.
Should
We're
we,
happy to host.
I think that makes sense. They
Yeah.
came here and we can go there to talk about the beginning structure of the next one.
Yep.
should we commit to having notes to the administrators by, like, within a month from now then? Cause that would give us
Quicker than that.
quicker.
Yeah, because we want to make it.
Within our next meeting cycle?
So let's see.
Yeah, 'cause
Ours, so our next meeting will be next week instead of on the 31st.
Ours as well.
So we can discuss.
And
it.
so,
We discussed that yesterday.
I think it's reasonable for us to be discussing things that we think are priorities individually then. I don't think it's appropriate to expect that any finalized ideas come out of that for our administrators to work on with each other. Maybe it is for you, but I would suggest that near the start of August, we typically meet the first and third Mondays, so August 7th for us. That's 2 meetings from now for us, that we should be able to have gotten our ideas into Dana as a board on how to handle this, and had it kind of coalesce so that at least as a board, we can be like, these are the things that we think are important and a couple ideas on how to solve this issue.
What if, I mean, this may be what you're saying, so I don't mean to over talk you, but, in the agreement, I haven't really reviewed the agreement,
haven't.
is it?
I haven't.
how
I'm gonna
many-
make sure you have it.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
thank you.
Yeah.
Anyhow, how many, is it a couple
2 pages.
pages?
2 pages.
Giving you
Yeah.
the original.
Yeah.
and
So,
the
so
edited.
what if, and this is probably what you're saying,
Does Dave
you go down
have
through and you kind of highlight what bothers you in the
Yeah.
agreement.
It's 2 weeks.
We'll highlight what
2 weeks,
bothers
Yeah.
us in the
So that
agreement,
one's Marlowe's.
and then, and that's kind of what you're saying,
oh,
correct?
oh.
Am I just,
Yeah,
am I
so-
simplifying into Marlowe's terms,
So-
Dave?
No, that's for you.
Sort of.
So 2 for Dave.
The problem is
Dave,
that,
it's yours.
I've got copies.
Oh, you got
from
copies,
before.
okay.
When we received the last resignations, we kind of
Oh.
talked about this as
Oh,
well. But it's less of, I have a problem with this, because of course, we're all gonna highlight that there's this committee, and there isn't really a committee, and it's
Oh, I
not
see,
doing what's
okay,
there.
I don't.
So
think
it's-
Okay, yep.
It's more like, how do we wanna tackle that?
Yeah, how do we just
And-
adjust it? It's not gonna be some sentence in there that we need to change, we
Right.
may just have adjustments that need to be made,
And
okay.
so I think for the boards, we should each individually, not as a whole board, we should each individually bring at least a, like, this is a concept that I'm thinking of that may help this, to our next meetings. And then the boards can discuss that and figure out what they want the administrators to look at, whether it's, hey, can you run this by legal? Is there some other town that's doing this type of thing as a framework, et cetera? And then the meeting afterwards, we should, as a board, be able to say, we think this is the direction we wanna go. Now let have the two administrators talk with each other and see where they can bring it together for us to look at as a joint board meeting the next time. That's just me, so please, administrators, tell me if I'm off on that, or if you think it's a good idea.
I think that sounds like a sensible way to approach it.
That's how I understood sort of what we were.
Oh, I just like to act like I don't. No,
So I guess my other question and concern here is that if we're looking at rewriting this agreement that has a committee that, yeah, they haven't been able to do what's in the agreement, but the committee technically exists, and I don't know how many people are there from your town. We've had people resign from it, but we'll certainly be interested in anything that happens in this regard. What and when is the best way to loop those people in? Because they probably have some ideas and or experience that would be relevant.
You mean like a public hearing?
I'm thinking more like the people that sit on that committee for Hopkinton, the people that used to sit on that committee for Webster. How do we appropriately pull that kind of information in? And at what point should it also be not just the refuse committee, but also the waste reduction committee and the conservation committees? And like, because they're all going to have points of view and ideas that could be helpful and will matter. Some of them may be more conservation and specific situation minded versus how to fix the agreement. And so I want to make sure that we're doing things in kind of the right order and not like derailing everything by involving too many people too soon, but also making sure that we do, as the two towns, involve kind of the same set of people on both sides in an active manner that makes sure that the different viewpoints are heard.
I think we maybe, because we've been dealing with this, or thinking about this maybe more than you guys have, so we've already sort of started that process and gotten a fair amount of input from those boards. A lot of those individuals are actually here tonight. And so I think, we're probably a little ahead of you guys in that regard. And so I guess my suggestion, and it's merely a suggestion because it's, your town and you solicit input the way you think best, but probably early and often in terms of gathering input from those respective groups that you were mentioning. And I'll also say that even though we've, as a board, talked about this a lot, I don't mean to suggest that we don't want to hear further input on this when it comes before our board, between now and the middle of September, when we hopefully are sitting down again to talk to this. But I do think we're a little further ahead just because we've been wrestling with this for a little longer.
That makes sense. Yes.
Pat LaPree, Hopkinton Waste Reduction Committee Co-Chair. I'm the minute taker. You want our minutes? I can CC them to your town administrator like I do to our administrative assistant. I CC the drafts when I write them within 5 days of the meeting and the finals. Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. As a way to understand, what we're doing.
Yeah, and again, maybe I'm not comprehending things quite correctly, but I'm thinking that your committee is not the committee that's being talked about here, because you're the reduction committee, not the committee that's trying, supposedly running the place.
Oh, right, yeah,
And-
no.
Although I'm on both.
Yeah, there's some overlap.
Okay, but so and especially knowing that that is a joint committee, I think that's actually an excellent idea, sending the minutes over, because that will help people on our town when we start posting minutes on the website to know that, hey, this committee does exist, why am I not seeing Webster stuff if we don't get representatives? And so it's an easier way for us to, well, we're trying, but no one is going, so we're reporting, sort of thing. So I think that would be definitely a help. And-
But you want me to wait till October, is that what you're saying?
Oh, no.
Okay.
I'm just trying to make sure that we're not confusing, that your committee is active in doing things that however this ends up getting reshaped is still gonna be important and impactful
Oh, yeah.
and
I understand.
not shaped by this.
Yeah, okay. All right, and all the minutes are posted on our town website as well, but I will CC them to you, Danny.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments or thoughts?
I'm glad we're starting this conversation now. Really, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, yeah.
Yes.
Before you wrap up, I'm Bob LaPree from Hopkinton. I was heavily involved with the pay-by-bag program back when it was brought in. I also spent several years on the Hopkinton Webster Transfer Station Committee. And my observation is that the whole setup was rather flawed to begin with, because it was not both towns equally participating in the green bag program. The point of the green bags was to get people to pay for what they're throwing away. And the way to minimize what they were paying is to recycle. So that's the idea behind that. You take the 32 pounds, and if you put recycling in it, okay, but you're paying for that 32 pounds. And I'd also like to point out that we established the cost of the bags very gingerly back then. And that was, what, 12 years ago, something like that? And I think now we're starting to talk about raising it. But the fact is, when we set that price of the $1.35, I believe it was, tipping fees were $35 a ton. Now they're over $100 a ton. So basically, the green bags merely do something of a subsidy, as it were. They're not really covering the cost by any stretch, and they never did. And we really figured, well, you know, it's a tough thing for people to swallow to have to pay $4 for a green bag. So we purposely kept it down low, realizing that it was really still just a subsidy rather than an actual cost-covering mechanism. And what's happened over the years, I remember very clearly there was a lot of acrimony in Hopkinton, because one of the reasons was that they felt that the folks of Webster were, being treated in a special way by not having to utilize the green bags. And unfortunately, that really set up an attitude on a number of people in Hopkinton that it was an unfair system, and they were going to game it. And they did. A lot of people were gaming at the beginning. I remember people talking about, well, I got property in Webster, I'm going to get a Webster sticker, that kind of thing. I'm not exaggerating. And so what has really devolved is that there's a fairly significant amount of scofflaw in Hopkinton, in the sense that we don't have an enforcement policy that is of any value. And I'm not just speculating. I can recall when the Tyler Bridge was closed for almost a year. Every Saturday morning I'd be out for my walk, and you'd see all these trucks, pickup trucks, full of black bags going to the dump. Well, they weren't coming from Webster, they were coming from Hopkinton. Nobody from Webster is going to come into Kentucky Village to go back out. So it's a clear indication there was a lot of people that were doing that. And they still are, because there is no way to really differentiate people without really being specifically on the ball, checking everybody when they come in. And if they're from Hopkinton and they don't have green bags, they have to take it back. Bonnie pointed out that our volume has gone up like 20%, even though our population has gone up, what, 5 or 6%? Well, that doesn't even take into account that there was a mass flight from using the transfer station after pay by bag. People used haulers specifically so they didn't have to use bags. We only had one hauler that would take bags, and the rest, they don't bring their trash into Hopkinton, you know, these haulers. They take them to mainly Wheelabrator, I think. So we have a certain amount of trash that's been diverted from our system just because people didn't want to get involved with the pay-by-bag system. And so we've really had a kind of a disappointing success on that. So that folks I see folks from Webster, and I see them doing recycling, but it's a voluntary thing for them. And that's the way we were before green bags. It was a voluntary thing in Hopkinton and Webster. And we wanted to get into a financial incentive to get people to recycle by reducing the cost that they have to pay for their bags. In the course of our history as small towns, we've always seen waste disposal as a town problem, and it's you got a dump, you take your stuff to the dump. It's not municipalities approach it in a different way. And we have always had kind of a laissez-faire attitude about it. But, in this day and age, we really have to think in terms of the consequences of such excessive trash that is just going to landfills. That's why recycling is important, even if it doesn't generate a lot of money. It reduces the tipping fees we're paying. And when the markets are good, we even make some money. There was a time there we were doing quite well, and it will probably come back. But I guess I don't want to belabor it. But we need to deal with the initial problem now of not having a good equitable system. And if Webster wants to continue to not be a green bag operation, then we have to figure out a way that we can make sure that our residents are adhering to the rules. And it's difficult because if you've got black bags, you could be from Webster, unless Jolene's out there checking everyone. That's how it slides through. So that's really poisoned a lot of people's attitudes. They know their scofflaws, and it's really disappointing. But I think if we can deal with that issue in the short term, in other words, get our enforcement up to par, then that would be helpful for a number of people in town who are behind the program completely, not just activists like us, and also it would tend to make sure that we're actually getting the kind of revenue we need to cover some of our tipping costs, because all those black bags go in basically free. And so that we need to deal with that. And one of my thoughts was, well, everybody gets a green bag. Everybody has to use a green bag. And if Webster doesn't want to have the kind of pay-by-bag we have, then you can give them away, to your folks. That doesn't really enhance any recycling because there's no nickel dime there. But what it does is it makes the issue of enforcement moot, because if you don't have a green bag, you can't put it in the hopper. I know that's a simplistic thing, but on the other hand, we do have a real problem with not having good compliance on our side. We want to encourage people to think about the resources we're spending on waste disposal, and so much of that waste disposal is unnecessary. And so it's a conundrum, and I really appreciate you guys wanting to get together and try to deal with it. But like I say, I think the first thing we have to deal with is this non-compliance by Hopkinton people. So, but thanks.
Thank you for that. I will state one thing, which from my past as an IT consultant, is you can't solve social problems technologically. And in this case, I don't think that anything we decide here is going to solve that problem for the bags. But you did bring up one really good point, which was there was a decision on how the bags were being priced. And even if town were to approve a green bag program, maybe we approve it with a price, maybe not. Those kinds of things in the future would then turn into the next same contentious issue. So I guess I'm just thinking out loud that, you know, that's another thing where you think you solve the problem by saying, well, both places are gonna do it, but then you still have the same problem. So I'll just point that out, and then everybody can think about it. But
Wouldn't it be cool we didn't have so many things that people just want to throw away?
it would be nice if more people bought quality once.
That's right.
And the packaging wasn't 5 times larger than the product.
That's right. Amazon boxes.
At least those recycle.
I suppose. They're still in the way.
Yes. But I recycle a lot of them. Was that another hand, or?
No, I was
Oh,
just stretching.
okay, sorry.
Thank you, though.
Stretching.
I just wondered, how's the, are we getting any money from, I mean, not we as, but is there recycling, is there any money in that anymore, or is this just a good luck? Is there still money in
Yes.
papers and all that stuff?
Has come back.
It's come back, oh, that's,
Way down for.
and yeah, right, so it'll probably end up, education is good, if we have to educate our people about doing that stuff. So, but I just was wondering if, you know, because I like to recycle too, I'm not for recycling, so.
It does reduce some of our tipping costs, because it reduces stuff that goes into the hopper. And if we make money on some of our products in the recycling, that's good, but we also save money by not having that stuff in the hopper.
Right, sending it away.
It's, you know, it's a little oblique, but it does have some value that way.
I'm a cheapskate, every nickel saved is worth something, so.
All right. Any further comments or thoughts? Any last words from our administrators before we overtask you?
From the table to the left. What's going on over here, kids?
You mean our last words? But I don't think so, yeah.
All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:27.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you so
coming.
much.
Thanks so much. Yes, thanks very much for doing this.
Thank you for coming, appreciate audiences too, with questions and answers.
I gotta look at it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't had that for a while.
Yeah, you're right, we haven't had, you know, every time I go